The cloister was a place of silence. Its stone arches framed a square of green grass, and the covered walkway echoed only with soft footsteps and whispered prayers. For most of the sisters, it was a place of peace, a space to walk in meditation, to recite verses, to reflect upon the holy life they had chosen. But for Margaret, it often felt like a prison. At 20 years of age, Margaret had not yet shed the restlessness of her youth. She had entered the convent reluctantly, her family sending her there to discipline her wild spirit. She wore the plain gray habit of a novice, a simple veil covering her chestnut hair, but her heart was not so easily subdued. The other novices often found her careless. She whispered during prayers, laughed when solemn silence was required, and sometimes slipped away from her duties to sneak extra bread from the kitchens. Her parchment exercises were sloppy, her embroidery unfinished. She treated her vows lightly, and while the sisters were patient, the abbess's patience was not infinite. On one cold morning, during the recitation of prayers in the chapel, Margaret's mischief went too far. As the voices of the sisters rose together in solemn chant, Margaret leaned toward the girl beside her and whispered a joke, her lips curving into a mischievous smile. The novice beside her stifled a giggle, but the sound carried in the vaulted chamber. Heads turned. Silence rippled across the hall, the abbess's voice cut through the air, every head bowed lower, save for Margaret's. She froze, her heart pounding, her lips pressed tight. But the girl beside her, pale with fear, pointed a trembling hand toward her, the abbess's eyes fixed upon Margaret. Tall, severe, clothed in the black habit and veil of her order, she seemed to tower like judgment itself. The prayers resumed, but all eyes followed Margaret as she was led away. Shame burned in her cheeks, though beneath it flickered a spark of defiance. The cloister was filled with the gathered sisters when Margaret was brought forth. She walked slowly, her steps echoing on the stone floor. Her gray novice's habit hung loose, her hands fidgeted with the hem of her sleeves, and her gaze was cast downward. The abbess stood before her, her hands folded over the polished wooden staff she carried, not a mere walking stick, but the symbol of her authority. At her side, one of the senior sisters held a coiled whip, its leather glistening faintly in the pale light. Abbess, voice stern and steady. Margaret, you have been warned time and again. You laugh during holy prayer, you neglect your duties, and you make mockery of this sacred place. The cloister is for silence and reflection, yet you fill it with idle chatter. You dishonor your vows. Margaret's lips trembled. She opened her mouth to speak. The abbess raised her hand, silencing her. Abbess, excuses are the tongue of the idle. This house is not for idleness. Correction must be given, lest others follow your path. Gasps and murmurs stirred among the novices, who stood in rows along the cloister's edge. Some clasped their hands tighter, others looked down at the ground. None dared intervene. The abbess's voice rang clear. Abbess, you shall be whipped here in the cloister, before your sisters, that all may remember that discipline guards the soul. Margaret's knees weakened. Her eyes darted to the others, their faces pale and solemn. Her heart thudded like a drum in her chest. The senior sister stepped forward, uncoiling the whip. Margaret was led to the center of the cloister, beneath the open sky. Her habit was loosened, pulled down to bare her back. The cold air stung her skin, and shame flushed her cheeks. She stood trembling, her hands pressed against the stone pillar she was ordered to hold. The whip cracked once in the air, sharp as thunder, making her flinch even before the punishment began. The abbess gave a solemn normal. The first lash struck, crack. The leather cut across her pale skin, leaving a burning stripe. Margaret gasped, her fingers gripping the stone, her body jolting, crack. A second followed, sharper, and she cried out, her voice echoing beneath the arches. The sisters watched in silence, their faces grim. Crack, a third stroke fell, drawing tears to her eyes. The pain was sharp, but worse was the humiliation. Her failure laid bare before them all. The whip rose and fell, each strike echoing against the stone walls, each cry of pain swallowed by the cold morning air. Some novices winced, their lips pressed tight as they turned their faces away. Others forced themselves to watch, knowing the abbess meant this as a lesson for them as much as for Margaret. At last, after a set number of lashes, the abbess raised her hand and the whip was lowered. Margaret sank to her knees, her cheeks wet with tears, her back marked with raw stripes. Her breath came in sobs, her head bowed low. The loosened folds of her gray habit clung to her trembling form. The abbess stepped forward, her voice steady and solemn. "Abbess, let all remember. A vow broken brings shame. Idleness breeds sin. Discipline is mercy, for it saves the soul from ruin. Let none follow Margaret's example." Her words carried through the cloister, echoing off the stone walls, sinking into the hearts of every novice. Margaret was helped to her feet, her steps unsteady. She pulled her habit close around her, hiding her tears as best she could. The novices returned to their duties in silence, but the memory of her cries and the echo of the whip lingered in their minds. That night, as Margaret lay upon her pallet, the pain in her back throbbed with every breath. Yet more than pain, shame weighed upon her, shame for her laughter, her idleness, her defiance. For the first time since she had entered the convent, she whispered a prayer with trembling sincerity, and so the lesson of the cloister was burned into her flesh and soul alike. Discipline may sting, but without it, there could be no salvation.